Hey everyone! One thing I'm sure we've all noticed as the Wings of Fire world progresses is that the queens and how they rule their kingdoms are changing rapidly. So today, while I draw some of our favorite ladies, I want to also talk about how the monarchies are changing and what that will mean for Pyrrhia in the future. Now, obviously, on a real-life level, one major reason the queens are changing for the better is because we know a lot of the queens now on a personal level as readers. We have Queen Glory, obviously, who is a main character, but we also have Thorn, Snowfall, who is another POV character, Ruby, Hazel, and princesses like Tsunami, Sunny, and Anemone. These are all characters who, if we didn't see them in a POV position, we saw them a lot throughout the books, and we like these characters. So obviously, Tsunami keeps them likable. But I think there can be in-universe reasons behind this shift too, so I wanted to discuss that today. So one thing I will say to start this off, I do think part of the reasons we see so many bad queens in the beginning of the series is in large part due to the war. Because remember, these tribes have been at war for 20 years, so either the queen in question is old enough to have seen 20 years of war, or they ascended the throne during that war. Either way, a conflict of that nature over such a length of time means that leadership has to be harsh and strict to hold things together. You can see the same thing reflected in countries all over the world throughout history. During times of war, there are stricter rules, sometimes including curfews, rationing, extra taxes, or a draft. Now, obviously, that doesn't translate exactly to the world of Wings of Fire, but you can understand what I'm saying here. Part of their leading technique would be based on reactions to the ongoing war around them. That being said, most of the queens, especially Scarlet or Battle Winner, were objectively bad dragons. Okay, though Scarlet is a class all of her own. Burn and Blister were also bad dragons. And then we have some queens who were more neglectful, like the Rainwing situation, Blaze, or Coral. And yes, Coral was on the better end of the scale. She's in half bad, and I know a lot of dragons really liked her, but she wasn't exactly a perfect leader either. Honestly, I think the only truly good queens during that war were Glacier, who I always thought was fair at least, given that Icewing Society is already pretty rigid, and Moorhen, who we never actually heard much about. I think she got some attention in the guidebook that came out recently, but I haven't read it, so I can't speak to that here. What with the monarchy situation being what it is over in Pentala, there isn't as much to say in regards to them. Plus, they haven't had the time Pyrrhia has to show us how things are changing. And obviously, Wasp was awful, though I did feel Sequoia did okay, and I think Hazel will do great, but there's just not as much to say about them. There aren't as many tribes, there isn't as much history. Anyways, in Pyrrhia, of the 6 tribes with queens, that leaves us with 2 bad queens, 2 neglectful queens, and 2 good ones. And then the Sandwing disaster. But then we start to see a huge shift, largely toward younger queens, who lead in a much better fashion than their predecessors. Ruby replaces Scarlet, Glory replaces Battle Winner and the Rainwing fiasco, Thorn takes care of the Sandwings, and we get Snowfall. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure Snowfall is an improvement on Glacier, but she's young and the newest of the queens, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt for the time being. I wasn't super impressed with her in Book 14, but she does have lots of grounds for improvement, and she made really good strides in that book. Anyways, one reason we're seeing better queens now, I think, is in part because the war is over. This takes a lot of the outside stress out of that position, allowing for the queen to focus on their tribe's welfare instead of just their survival. Also, like I mentioned earlier, since we know and love a lot of these characters, of course they're going to continue behaving well. But I also think it's reflective of the general mood of Pyrrhia right now. They've just finally finished this war that has been a huge influence for so long, and for the first time in literal decades, there is a mood of hope in the air. There's hope that things can be better, that the tribes can be better, and a desire to avoid having to fight another war like that anytime in the future. Not to mention, a lot of the newer queens are products of their generation. They aren't so set in their ways, they haven't been ruling their tribe the same way for years and years, they are only now developing their habits and preferences, and those preferences are molding more to a peaceful Pyrrhia than a war-torn one. So I think this shift is sort of a 3-part equation. Age and experience is playing a factor, the end of the war is playing a factor, and of course the love that the audience has for many of these characters is playing a factor outside of the story. And how will this affect Pyrrhia in the future? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, and we're already seeing the results of queens more interested in peace and prosperity than their own interests. We're seeing tribes more willing to work together, resulting in more ideas being exchanged, more resources shared, and even more hybrids. But it also makes the peace real. After all, to the ordinary dragon, what makes the end of the war seem more real than seeing your queen willing to work with other queens? Trusting them, considering their ideas, and taking them seriously. That says, we're finally done fighting, and it lets the ordinary dragon know that they too can begin to trust other tribes. Now, the scars of a 2-decade-long war, as bloody as the Sandwing War of Succession, don't just disappear, obviously. But rebuilding has to start somewhere, and it's much easier if the leaders model it first. Something the newer queens of Pyrrhia are getting right is the idea that rulers serve their nations, not the other way around. At its core, government of any kind, whether a monarchy or a democracy or anything, needs to serve the interests of its people. Otherwise, it's a tyranny. And I think the tribes are going to start seeing a lot of positive change now that many of them have rulers more dedicated to service than selfishness. So I think one of the biggest changes we'll see is an increase in trust and cooperation, which obviously has already been shown canonically with Jade Mountain Academy, and as much as I despise it, the delegation that went to Pantala. Although it was a poor plot decision, it was a good example of inter-tribe cooperation. It does make me wonder, though, how the changes we're seeing might affect the tradition of challenging the previous queen and fighting to the death for the throne, because that's been around for at least 2,000 years since we saw it in Darkstalker Legends, but I do wonder. I can't really see Sunny fighting Thorn for the throne, and Tsunami and Anemone are like, iffy. I know Tsunami talks about it a lot in her book, and Anemone can be pretty cutthroat, but at the end of it, I don't know if either of them would actually do it. I don't know if they would actually kill Coral. We'll have to see about Glory's Dragonettes too. I mean, if the previous queen steps down, how would that even work? Would that undermine the new queen, leaving her in this weird position where some dragons would still inevitably look to the older queen before the new? So maybe a fight, but not to the death? To establish dominance without having to murder your mom or aunt or whatever? It's food for thought. Anyways, now that we've talked a bit about the queens, let's talk for just a sec about the art. You may have noticed the pieces I'm working on today are strangely vertical compared to most of my other art, and that's because these are actually bookmarks, hence the shape, and they are available in my store right now. There's a link in the description and a pinned comment if you want to go check them out. Although the art isn't all shown here, there's a set of 6, featuring Thorn, Coral, Scarlet, Hazel, Glory, and Snowfall. I wanted the bookmarks to all have a similar feel, but distinct posing, so I took a lot of care to make sure every queen's pose was a little different from the others. But I also wanted them to match as a set, so I did the little border around each of them to kind of add some pop. Plus, each queen has an array of jewelry to help them match up as a set too. Overall, it turned out great, and the bookmarks themselves are quite nice quality too. I'm pretty happy with this project, which I've been working on in my spare moments for about a month now. Anyways, bookmark plug aside, do check out the description for links to my Patreon, DeviantArt, and all that jazz, so you can see the rest of my work. If you enjoyed this video, comment below and tell me who your favorite queen is, and why. I love hearing y'all's favorites on these types of videos. Thanks for watching, and y'all have a great week.